Alright, so we finished up our home page and we have a button that will direct us to our to-dos. But now let's actually make the page for the to-dos. So right now we have this error that pops up when we go to /to-do because we didn't define a page for to-do. So it's just going to show that this page cannot be found. So let's actually leverage Next.js now to create a route for to-do. And to do that, we have to create a folder in Pages because, like I said, Pages handle all the routing in Next.js. If we right click on Pages, create a new folder, and we're going to call it to do to actually create that specific route. Now we have the /to-do. But to actually show something to display on to do, we'll create a file within that to do folder, and we're going to call this index.js. This file will contain the logic on what is going to be displayed when we go to /to-do. And I am going to leverage an extension that I have. If I go to my extensions tab, I'm using ES7 React Redux snippets for all my snippets that I'm going to use to take a little shortcuts to save some time. And what I mean by shortcuts is I can use little keywords, and that will pretty much populate my code based on the keyword that I use. So in this case, I'm going to use RFC, which will create a functional component for me. And I press enter, and I see that I have a React functional component. And all I got to do is change the name. So I'm going to change that to do home. And now when I go back, I see an all white page, and that's because it's actually serving a page to that specific route of /to-do. But because I have nothing in this file, there's nothing to show, which is going to show all white. So now I want to start putting some logic on this page for when a user actually goes to /to-do. The first thing that I want to do is, if a user comes to this page, I don't want them waiting on any data to appear or anything like that. I want to show a spinner or a loading circle so that they know that the data is coming. So to do that, I'm going to leverage some state management in React. So there's a thing called useState, and I'm going to use another snippet, useState. And what this does is it's going to allow us to create a variable that's going to store our state for us. So in this case, I'm going to create a variable called isLoading, which will hold a boolean of true or false on whether or not the page is loaded or not. If it's loading, which, in this case, that means if it's true that this is loading, then I'm going to show the loading circle. And if it's false, then I'm going to show the to-do data that we have. So in this case, I'm going to call this variable isLoading. And this setState piece is just going to be a function that we're going to use to change the state value. So in this case, when we're done loading, we can use the setState piece to actually change the state from true to false. So what I'm going to call this function is setIsLoading. Right? It's a good convention to use the word set, right? And the initial state is going to be true, because when the user first gets on this page, I want to make sure that the spinner is being shown. Then afterwards, we can set it to false. Right? And to set it to false, let me just show it really quick. You just use setIsLoading, open up parentheses, use the value that you're trying to change it to, which is false. And now this isLoading is going to be equal to false. So that is how you use that. And now we can do some logic right before. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the isLoading variable. So if isLoading is true, then we want to return a loader, which is just going to be a component that Mantine has that shows a loading spinning circle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it with the div tag, and I'm going to use the class name of center, because I created a style in my styles folder, and within this globals.css file, I deleted everything else, but I put this specific style called center, which will, as the name implies, center everything. So I'm going to use the display of flex, justify content of center, align items of center, and of height of VH to make sure that it's filling up the whole screen. And it's going to center that specific item in the middle of the screen. So if I use the class name of center, then it's going to center that item in the middle of the screen. And this style is accessible throughout the whole application, because if I go into my underscore app.js file, which is provided by Next.js when we use the create next app, this is where our components come through. And right here at the top, there's an import for the global.css. So as our components come through here, there's already an import. So all our everything that's within the global.css file is accessible to all our components. So index.js has access to this center class name. So that's why I'm using it, right? So let's use the loader tag or component within this div and save that. And if we go back, and useState is not imported because I forgot to import it. So useState, and that'll be imported from React. Save that, go back, you see that the loader is spinning because its loading is true right now. Because by default, I'm setting it to true until I manually set it to false when I know for sure that the data is loaded properly. And if I set this to false, if I set it the default value to false, you'll see that when I go back, it doesn't show the spinner because it's going to skip this logic, right? And it's going to go to this other return that's going to return nothing. So that's how I'm leveraging the loader. That's how I'm centering it. And now we can start on the search bar piece. Because remember, this page is going to have a search bar, a plus button to add a to-do. And we're going to show all the to-dos that we have in our database that we created. And we're going to also have a modal to insert, different to-dos. So let's actually create our search bar. The first thing that I'm going to leverage though is I'm going to create another state called search text, because as the user types in items into the search bar, I want to hold on to that text. So I'm going to just make sure beforehand that I create a state for that. And I'm going to use the snippet again. I'm going to call this search text. And I'm going to call this function that we're going to change, we use to change the value of search text to set capital S search text. And I'm going to make the initial states equal to an empty string because initially I want the search text to be empty string, and then it'll update it to whatever value the user puts in the search bar. So right here, I'm going to actually check out these divs, and I'm going to use a container from Mantine. And then I'm going to create another container specifically for the search bar. And Mantine also does provide a component called text input, which is essentially a search bar. It's just input that we can use to type in whatever we need to type in. In this case, it's going to be a search bar for our to search through or to filter through our to-dos. So we'll just use text input and we'll import that from Mantine. As you can see right here, it just automatically imports it for us. And what we're going to do is make sure that it's closed. But I'm going to bring this down a couple of lines because we're going to use some properties for this text input. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a label. What this label is going to do is it's going to output some text that let the user know what's expected from the search bar. So in this case, what I expect from the user to put into the search bar is a to-do name. All right. And if I save that and I go back, we see that we have now a search bar and the label shows to-do name. All right. So now I can start texting some stuff in, but it's not going to actually do anything, right? We have, things that we're typing in, but we have to take that value. And I created a state above here called search text, which we want to use to store whatever the user types in. But currently we don't have any logic to store that into search text. So let's actually do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a property called onChange, which will allow us to create a function to handle events that occur while we're typing into this text input. So we're going to make that equal to and open brackets, and we're going to actually create the function. So let's open up some parentheses, and within this I'm going to use a variable name called event, which is going to show as deprecated initially, but this is just a VS Code thing. As we continue typing in, it's going to work, but this is nothing to do with onChange. It's not deprecated. So what we're going to do is event is simply going to be each value that the user types into the search bar. So say for instance the user types in A, events will equal to A. If they type in ABC, event will equal to A, B, and C. So what we're going to do with that event is we're going to take that event value that comes in, and we're going to update the search text. So let's actually create the logic. So we're going to do this little arrow open up some curly braces, and we're going to define the logic for that. So like I said, this set search text is simply a function which we can use to update this search text, right? So initially this is going to be an empty string, but if we use set search text, open up this parentheses, and we pass in the event, what this is going to do is whatever value the event is going to be, we set the search text to equal to event, and now search text is going to equal to the event that we passed in. And I can prove that by using these curly braces and passing in the variable of search text. And now as we type into the search bar, search text is going to display onto the screen. So let's do that. Oops. And that's a human error. It's not just event, it's event.currentTargets.value. That's actually how we get the value from the event, because the event itself is an object, but to get the specific value we have to use some keys to get the actual value. So the key is going to be currentTargets.value. So now if you go back and we put in value, we see as we start typing into the search bar, we see that the value is showing up at the bottom because we're outputting the search text. And the reason why the search text is changing from the initial empty string to whatever we're typing in the search bar is because on change, every key value that gets changed, we're setting that value to search text, and set search text is updating search text. So it's working as expected. Now we have the functionality for the search bar. Cool. And this is centered. I just had this zoomed in, so it looks weird, but if I zoom out, everything is centered. But just for, to be able to see, I have it zoomed in, so it looks a little bit off. So cool. We have that logic. I can erase this, and let's create another container, because what I want to do is I want to create a button that will allow the user to add a to-do. So we're going to create another container, and I'm going to put the button underneath the search bar, and I'm going to use the button. We already have some experience creating buttons. I'm just going to import the button from Mantine, as you can see right here, and I'm going to start defining the color. I want to keep the colors the same, so I'm going to do gradient, or actually I'm going to do variant, and then I'm going to make that equal to gradient. And then I'm going to do gradient, and I'm going to set that equal to from, and I'm going to make that 2, and then I'm going to create another one called 2. I'm going to make that equal to lime green, and then I'm going to do degree, and then that's going to equal to 105. Then I'm going to close out the button. Whoops. And I'm going to put this on another line because it's too long, and then it'll look a little bit more cleaner. Right there. Cool. So if I go back, actually I forgot to put in what I want inside of the button. So let me open up that button, and I'm going to use a plus, because that's going to let the user know that when you click on this plus, we want to add a to-do. So if I go back, you see we have a green button with a plus in the middle, but I don't like how close it is to the search bar, so I'm going to add a margin to the container that's going to push, we're going to add some space between the search bar and the button. So like I said previously, we can use some properties that Mantine provides with these containers, which is to add a margin or margin top. All you got to do is use MT, which is short for margin top, and make that equal to whatever value that you want. So open up the curly braces, and I'm going to make that equal to 10, and now we have a margin top of 10. And if I go back, we see some space, and now we're good to go. So cool, we're making some progress. We have a search bar, we have a button. Now I want to add some logic, so when I click on this button, it actually does something. And in this case, I wanted to pop up a modal, so let's do that. So like I said, Mantine just does so much, right? So we don't have to make our own modal. We can just leverage a component that Mantine provides called modal. So let's do that, modal, and just import that. If I go back up, we see that modal is imported from the same Mantine/core, because as the name implies, that's the core with most of the components. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign some properties. Let me actually close this up though. And everything within, like that we put within these two modal tags, will be inside of the modal when we open it up. But we have to find a way to actually open it up. So there's some things that this modal component needs to actually function. So the first property is going to be called opened, and this is just to let the modal know when to open or not. So we're gonna have to create another state called opened. That's gonna be either true or false, which will let our modal know whether or not to be open or not. So let's do that. Let's create another state, another snippet. All right, use states, and I'm gonna call this opened, and I'm gonna use a capital O here, and I'm gonna use the initial state of false because initially we want our modal to be closed. It's only when the person clicks on this button that we want it to open, and we actually do have to set some logic for that, right? When the user clicks on the button, that's when we want the modal to open. So let's actually do that right now. So it should be relatively easy. React comes with a property that we can use called onClick. And even when I put on, you can see there's so many things that you can do. There's like onClick capture, there's onChange capture, there's so many. We used onChange before for text input, but in this case we just need onClick. And we'll just make another function to handle when something is clicked on. So we don't need anything within here because we're not capturing any events or anything like that. We just want to know that when it gets clicked, we want it to run this function, or we want it to do a certain thing. So in this case, we want to set open to true, because we know for sure when a person clicks the plus button, we for sure want the modal to open. So we want to set this open state to true. It was false. We want to set it to true. So we're going to use the set opened function, and we're going to set it to true. So whenever this is clicked, it will set the open variable to true, and we pass that opened variable to the modal, so that means the modal will pop open. Now we're also going to set another thing, another property. We're going to call it's called onClose, and that's a property for the modal. And when the person press the X in the modal, it's going to close the modal. So we have to let the modal know how exactly or what to change to make that modal close. So in this case, we're going to define another function, open up some curly braces, and define another function to let the modal know that we will set the set open or set the open variable to false. And to do that, to change the value of a state, we'll use the set opened function that we defined up here to set the opened variable to false. And that's what we're doing. Cool. And we're going to give the modal a title so that when we open it up, it has a title. That's another property that, you can see that that's one of the props that the modal has to offer. That Mantine set as a property. So we're going to set this title equal to add to do, because that's what we're doing. What we're trying to do is trying to add it to do. So let's save that. And then now, like I said, within this, like between these two tags, whatever we set between these two modal tags is what we're going to see inside the modal. So what we want is we want two text inputs, and we want a button to submit. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set a text input, and I'm going to make that label, label equal to title. And I'm going to set, actually I'm just going to close that for now. We're going to create the onChange after I actually create each one, but for now I'm just going to have just text input with a label of title, a text input of label of description, and I'm just going to close that out. And I'm going to set a button, and I'm going to make this also a variant, right? And I'm going to make this a gradient, and I'm honestly just going to copy this line. I like keeping my UI is very similar. I'm a boring person, I guess, but we'll save this, and then we'll just test it. Let's go back. I click this plus, boom. Looks very basic right now, but for the most part, it's there. So we have the title that we created, which is add to do. We have the title text input with the label that we created, the description as well. We created a button. I forgot to give it something to put inside, like submit or something, but it's there. It's not doing anything right now, but it's there. And then we have this X, right? and that is going to be the on close property that we define. So when we press X, it actually closes it because it sets the open state to false. So we have some functionality. So now let's actually try to capture some of the additions that the user makes, right? Or let's try to clean up the modal a little bit because I didn't handle any of the actions that occur when the user presses a button. I didn't even put anything within the button. So let's go back and do that. So let me actually first put this on a separate line to make it easier to see. And let me actually open up this button because I actually want to give it a value inside, and I'm gonna call it this. I'm gonna call it add because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to add it to do, and then I'm gonna start defining an on change in here. Now, what are we changing? Right, we're having a title, we have a description, and when we click on this button, we want to add a task, right? So what I want to do is I want to create a state for a specific task. I want to create an object that holds the value of the title and a value of the description, so that when I press add, I can just send that object to our API to be saved. And that should be relatively easy because we've been handling states this whole time. So let's do useState. Let's use the snippet again. And what we're going to do is I'm going to call this new task. And I'm going to use a capital N, set new task for the function name. And I'm going to create an object. We're getting the full experience here. First we use a boolean, we use an empty string. Now we're going to use an object. And the object is going to have two values. It's going to have a title, and I'm going to set the initial value to equal to an empty string, and I'm going to have a description. Hopefully I spelled it properly. And it's going to have an empty string as well. So as we update things, or as the user updates the title in the text input and the description in the text input, it will update this object with those values. And when the user submits, we'll just submit the new task object. Sounds like a plan. All right, so to do that, all we got to do is go into our text input, and let me just bring that down. I left too much space here, but on this line right here, I'm going to use on change, just like we did before. We're going to make that equal to we're going to open up curly braces and make a function. We're going to capture the event, so we're going to use the event variable. We're going to use this arrow to point to what we wanted to do, and what we want to do is we're going to set a new task. And what I'm really going to do is I'm just going to open up the object, and I'm just going to populate the specific field that I need to change, right? So what I'm going to use the spread operator of new task, which is going to take everything within the current new task variable, and I'm just going to take everything within that new task, and I'm just going to populate specifically the title, and I'm going to set that equal to the event.current target.value. So essentially what this spread operator is saying is that I want to take all the values currently within new task, and I want to just update this title with this current value of what the user is putting in for the text input of title. Right? I'm going to remove that space, and I'm going to do the same thing with description. Right? I am going to, honestly, I'm probably just going to copy this whole line, right? And I'm going to paste it right at the bottom. What I'm just going to put here is, okay, I got this event of what this person is putting into this description input. I'm going to set a new task. I'm going to use a spread operator to take everything within this new task, but I'm just going to update description, and I'm just going to take the value of description from this text input, and we are good to go. All right, and then now afterwards I can just show really quick. Let me see. I can show that new task dot title and new task dot description is being changed. I'm gonna have to add like a on click here to when a person clicks on it, then it's gonna make a request to add the task. We're gonna do that in a few, but just to show that this is working, let's go back, press the plus, do title. As you can see, that is changing at the bottom. And let's do description. As you can see, even though we change the description, it's not erasing the title because we use the spread operator. So it's taking with everything within the current object and just updating what we need to update, which in this case was description, and vice versa. It's not deleting description. It's just taking everything within the new task variable and object and updating it based on the event that are coming in. So it's working. It's just as expected. And honestly, I see that this requires some space. So let's put a margin there. So let's do, because this is a Mantine component, we can just do empty directly on the button. And let's do 10. And boom, there's some space. We're good to go. So let's erase this. We know that it works. And now we just got to start defining. We just got to make a couple of API requests first. So now let's actually start defining some of these functions to start making these API calls for things that we need.